I didn't realize till I got older, like, oh, there's like a switching that's happening.
The whole time I'm wrestling of like, I'm black, but I'm light skinned.
Which one am I? Am I British? Am I Zambian? Am I American? Like, who am I supposed to be?
So America's origins have created and laid a foundation for this country to be a melting pot, like people coming from all over. And the reality is, for all of us, our parents weren't born here. I'm first generation American,
Right.
Jamaica, you know, we got Nigeria, Zambia, Ethiopia, all over the place. And growing up here in a culture that's different from where we came from, it comes with its unique challenges, you know, learning, but also unique blessing. I think that the Lord has definitely hidden some treasure in that journey, navigating identity, navigating what it means to belong, finding your people in your group, honoring your culture while also walking in a new thing. And I think that's the story of all believers, which is cool. Like, we are of a new kingdom, born a new creation, but called to live in a place for a time that's not necessarily home. Your parents came and were navigating their own kinds of experiences. My mom came from the Caribbean as a teenager, ran away from home. I don't know how you run away to a new country, but she did it. That's kind of amazing. So what was you guys' experience navigating all the new and having a culture at home, but then having to step out into a different thing?
Yeah, I think for me, it was like a learned process just as I was living, just existing, because for me, I was the youngest to be born, and we all immigrated over from Nigeria when I was basically a baby. And so for me, my consciousness was in America. However, like, my parents don't speak English to me and stuff like that. And so it's like going to school, it's English, coming back home, it's Yoruba. Yeah, it just seemed like it was normal. It didn't feel like a other. It just felt like, oh yeah, like when I'm with my mom and stuff, we speak this language, and when I'm at school, I'm living like this. And so I think I didn't realize till I got older, like, oh, there's like a switching that's happening, or there's like a normalization in your mind. That during this time frame you're acting this way, and during this time frame you're acting this way.
I feel like I relate to a lot of, you know, your story in the sense, because my parents are from Zambia, and so I was born there, and then we moved to England first. So I feel like I had two like immigratory experiences. So I feel like when I went to England, I definitely don't think it was like, I think it started feeling like, you know, a lot of the people we were interacting with was more of like a curiosity type, like, oh, we've just never been around this. Of course, like at the school I went to, me and my brother were the only like black people, let alone African people. So I just think that like there was a lot of curiosity and interest. But I think that like as I got older, that what was curiosity started to turn into like othering and like alienation a little bit. So I was balancing the fact that I really loved England and I really loved things about Zambian culture with the fact that like it wasn't being celebrated in a lot of my experiences. I think the redemptive thing was really like when I encountered God, he helped me to reframe my understanding of my identity in the sense that like I don't have to pick one, that all of those things are things that God has woven together to write my story. And they're all beautiful parts of my heritage that I get to embody, and it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be all of it that helped to, you know, turn me into me. But I think that initially it was pretty difficult to figure out like, which one am I? Am I British? Am I Zambian? Am I American? Like who am I supposed to be?
No, I relate to that heavy because my family's Guyanese and Jamaican, and then I'm first generation American, and even those two cultures, like Jamaica, if you meet Jamaicans, we're very this way, period. Boisterous and loud, and we're the best. Yes, we're a small country. Don't matter. We are the best. And so, but even that, so like my dad would clown Guyanese culture. So from the beginning, I'm wrestling already of like, okay, well, 50% of me isn't good enough. And then I started going to school. And I'm very introverted. I'm a sit back and watch person. And so I would just take everything in, and the whole time I'm wrestling of like, I'm black, but I'm light skinned. And so being black enough, and my hair is weird. I had cornrows like my whole life. And so it's not until recently that I found Christ about 10 years ago, and he's been taking me on the journey of embracing like all of parts of my identity are intentional, like every single part. And so it's cool to hear you say that, because I'm just learning to walk into embracing. I remember my first sermon where I preached and used my Jamaican accent, and everybody was like, yo, that's crazy. And it was like, no, you don't understand. That was a big thing for me to do. I don't do that, you know. I only use my accent at home. So with the homes you guys grew up in, were they really rich in your culture? Did they assimilate quickly?
Yeah, I kind of even want to talk about the fact that, like, in my space, you guys talked about moving to spaces where, like, maybe there was more culture present. My mom immigrated from Ethiopia straight to South Dakota. And so, I mean, like, there's no African people there but the ones that were, like, refugees fleeing from war at the time with her. And so coming into that place, like, I could only imagine. She was 15 years old, and my dad, he soon came after, but from Somalia. And so coming to a space where, like, there is none of that. They're farmers, you know, like, and the position where, like, they probably have never even had the chance to understand African culture. My mom, almost in a sense, had to separate and grow up really quickly. And she came by herself and ended up living with her sister, so no parents or anything like that. Like, she had to live her life on her own. And so for her, I think when she saw that, she was the one that felt, and I could even see maybe her in your story, like, thinking, wow, like, I'm different, like, and I have to change in this sense. And so, like, recognizing that now and even looking at that viewpoint, I know why I don't even know much about my own culture, and it's because she had to sacrifice to fit into where she was at, you know? And so I think there was a lot of robbing of that from me, and not in the place of, like, she meant to take it, but just so that she could protect herself in that sense when she was growing up in a town like Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And so, yeah, I mean, I sometimes feel almost ignorant to speak on the fact of what I grew up in or whatever else, but I do have snippets of moments of, like, eating African culture food, like Ethiopian food, Somalian food, or sitting down. Like, I thought this was so normal, but I remember my first time at school in kindergarten when I got to, like, use silverware for the first time, and I was like, wait, we don't eat with our hands here? Like, what's going on? Like, there's tables, like, we had a dining table, we didn't use it. Like, we sat on the floor and ate as a family with our hands, you know? And so I have little snippets of things of, like, wow, like, okay, I got to hold on to that, and I love moments like that, but also, like, the reminder that when you come to America, yeah, there is some things that you're gonna have to sacrifice and separate, even as a refugee or an immigrant. And so, yeah.
What have you guys discovered in the in-between space? Like, there are parts of your culture that are really rich and big parts of your life, and then there are parts that you have had to sacrifice or you don't feel as in touch with. How do you reconcile those two spaces?
Yeah, I think that, like, there's a couple of things that I think that sometimes I, like, grieve. Like, one of the things being, I wish that I would have known my parents' mother tongue. It's called Bemba, and I'm like, dang, I wish y'all would have, you know, spoken to me in Bemba. Like, even if you taught me English first and taught me Bemba second, whatever order, sometimes I wish I could have known. Really, just to also just have another language. It's crazy to me that, like, the second language I know is Spanish, which is like, I don't have any connection except that I lived in Arizona. Why do I know more Spanish than I do, you know, my own home language that we all speak, that our whole family speaks. And I even think growing up, because the food smell, you know, at school, like when you brought your school, like the food smell was so drastic and people were doing too much reacting. I think for a long time, I kind of, like, I like the food, but I think I just felt like it was making me too different, I guess. I didn't mind being different. I think it was being too different to where it was like I couldn't just exist in a room without constant attention that wasn't even like, constant commentary. Like, sometimes I just want to be a participant in what was going on, and I felt like that wasn't the case. And it translated into, like, my relationship with, like, our cultural food, in the sense that I, like, didn't want, you know, I didn't really want to eat it. I was like, I'll just, you know, make something else, and I didn't want to bring it. And so I think, like, over the last couple of years, I've been realizing, like, that food is bomb. I don't know why I was tripping. I don't care what y'all think. Matter of fact, if you want to bite, let me know. I don't think I was, like, ashamed of being Zambian or ashamed of Zambian food. I think I just wanted to create a little bit of distance.
Push it away a little.
You know, for safety. Yeah. And I think now I'm like, I think that the safest place I am is when I'm understood. And so I think like if I can bring you in to what's going on, and if you can see a glimpse of what God's done in my life through my story, through my family, through this food, through this culture, then like I want to invite you in. And if you don't want to come, don't come.
Cool.
You know.
Not to make this too deep, but like even in psychology,
Make it deep, girl.
we talk about like self-compassion, which that word has been so, but I'm talking compassion the way Jesus is compassionate, because we kind of splice our lives and our identities and say, I like these parts, but I don't really like these parts, and we push those parts of ourselves away, but then we're lacking, we're missing, you know? And so learning to integrate, like even we're talking the gospel, like the Lord loves every part of you. How dare you love any part of you less? You know what I'm saying? That's self-compassion. And so learning to integrate that. And you're making me emotional. So I moved out when I was 17, life took off. And then now my mom has moved back in with me. And I remember I'm trying to integrate all of me. So I'm leaning into the food, and Jamaican food take minimum 10 hours. You know what I'm saying? Like you all day. This is an endeavor. We're dedicating. So I remember my mom came home from work just a couple weeks ago, and she goes, it smells like a Jamaican restaurant in here. And I wanted to cry because it was like she had also given up those parts of herself. And now me getting to celebrate it brings her back to her home. And it was just, it was really cool.
One of the most beautiful things I've ever heard, and this is just recently, and I'm still trying to process it, I'm like, wow, but it's that my parents are experiencing this life for the first time too. And so like recognizing that the things that I have like once felt like robbed of, or like I felt like, oh, like why would this or that or the other, putting blame on them, and I had to recognize like, no, like they're experiencing this life for the very first time too. The things that I'm walking through, like my mother was a kid that grew up and had kids, you know? And so it wasn't like this like space for her to even come into a position where I'm at now and have the ability to do the things that I do. And that doesn't put a weight on me, but it helps me remind that I like to honor her. The beauty of that is knowing that I can give her back what she had to sacrifice for me to be in a place like this today, you know?
And I think one thing that's interesting, like as an adult, I feel like I've almost been seeing my mom's perspective of life completely differently. Just so many things now come into play. But I think about how I finished college, and I'm like, would I go back and start over? And I'm like, no. And I think about my mom when she came, she was in her 30s. And so she had to start over, like, because America doesn't respect a lot of other countries' degrees. And so she had a whole degree, with, like a chemist and everything, like a doctor comes over here and they're like, oh, that's cute, but no. And it's like, so I just spent 10 years of my life for nothing, basically. And it's like, that's not for the weak. Like, imagine God's like, do it all again, you know? It's
like wearing 30-pound ankle weights, having to walk everywhere. It's extra layer of pressure.
It definitely makes you appreciate just all the sacrifices. And it also makes me want to encourage her of like, hey, like, continue to be proud of who you are, you know, continue to love yourself, because even them, I think they try to teach us of like, hey, like, you know, in this world you're going to have trials and stuff, but luckily, you know, we're living in a different version of America, you know. Things are way different than like the 90s of like the temperament, you know, black people, white people, all of us uniting. And so, I think it's really interesting of the climate she had to grow up in, but then also just the freedom that we're walking in as the next generation, and just the unlearning you have to do, because it was real. Like you really got treated like a certain way for like 10 years, but then now it's like, oh, life is different now. It's like, how do I unlearn that, you know, you made fun of my voice, but now being African is cool now. Or like, oh, you made fun of my hair, but now natural hair is cool now. Like a lot of things start to click in my mind of like, oh, that's why she acted like this. Oh,
that's why that hurt.
And this is very understandable.
I feel like one of the things I like really honor in my mom is that somehow she was always able, both of my parents were both able to stay so encouraging, and so like everything that they just would say to us while they were navigating all of these things that they were navigating was just always like full of hope. They were able to remain so hopeful about our futures, even while, you know, very similar to what you did. Like both of my parents had to go back to school again, get full degrees again. My mom went even further this time. She didn't just do a bachelor's, she did a master's degree, but she was working, and not just one job. She was a nurse when we moved here, but she was working 4 or 5 jobs at one point, doing all of that. My dad's working. We're just navigating all of this stuff, and I think then at work they're encountering racism. No one can understand them supposedly because of their accents, and you know, those moments where it's like, Linga, can you just do it? I think I had to like, I feel like in some ways I was like acting as like the professional spokesperson of my family. I can't imagine now looking back, because I don't think I have the patience of my parents. Maybe I think to myself like, girl, I would not make it that far when people acting up. I know you heard me the first time. Go ahead and run me my burger. You know, you heard what I said. You heard what I said. What's like, why are we doing all this? So I think like sometimes I'm like, man, my parents really navigated that with so much grace. And like, I feel like now, of course, they're not perfect, like anyone, but like there's so much they shielded us from, or just stayed hopeful about. They like just remained so hopeful. They were like, you know, just trust God, just, you know, just stay faithful, just, you know, remember that like everything about you is intentional. Like the way you look is how you were intended to look. I don't want them to ever feel like what they've sacrificed was like in vain. You know what I mean, or was for nothing. Like I'm so grateful, even just for the little moments and the big things. It's where it's like, all of this that you did has made room for this. And so I think I think a lot of it, the thing that's helped me is the fact that my parents were hopeful, because then I think now for me, I'm not encountering the same level of pain or the same type of struggle, but it's like, if they could be hopeful in that, I can be hopeful in this.
I can pick my eyes up.
Yeah.
And when I hear your story, it almost like brings me to this emotional space, because I hear that story and I hear God in the midst of it. And I was reading this passage. It talks about it's God our refuge. It says, God will help her when the morning dawns. Nations rage, kingdoms topple, the earth melts. When he lifts his voice, the Lord of armies is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. And come and see the works of the Lord. And like in your parents, I see that embodied, even in you, and how you speak of them in honor. And I come back to the position of seeing my mother or my father. And them going through the same thing, but them following a God that doesn't have that same hope, you know, and have that same embodiment. I mean, they came and they're without that. And I can't even imagine that. And it brings me almost to tears, because it's like they're walking through this, but my mother didn't hear that she's made in the image of God. She ended up trying, like she used that skin bleach that, you know, came out at one point, and bleaching her skin and all this other things. And it's like, I just wonder what it would have looked like if she knew that God was for her, and that she didn't have to work for God or do things for God, but if she just knew that she was made in his image and she was created in that way. Or my father, like if he knew that he didn't have to remove himself completely from certain things because he was made in the image of God and God was fighting for him, you know? And I find this beauty in knowing that, like, I get to now hold on to that truth and speak that truth, maybe not in the light of face to face, but praying that into their hearts, because they still are young. You know, my mom had me at 16 years old, so she's 30, you know, and she still has a whole life ahead of her to figure out like what life looks like in her 30s and coming into her 40s soon. But there's so much life ahead, you know, and I see that in you, and I'm like, Lord, I pray that she, and your mother too, like I pray that she one day comes to that position of knowing there is hope, because right now it's just been fighting to survive day in and day out in a place that she doesn't know, you know.
I think about when I was in middle school, like, basically being ostracized for being dark skinned. Like, it was like, oh yeah, if you're dark skinned, you're not pretty. Like, that's just the definition of ugly, basically. And I remember with the skin bleaching thing, like, I just really wanted to bleach my skin so badly. I was trying to figure out, how can I get access to this? I remember one of my cousins had some, and I was like, oh, let me try this at her house. And I just remember feeling like just so horrible, like literally hating my skin so much because I was dark skinned and like just getting made fun of and stuff like that. And it's crazy too, because it was literally only God that transformed me, like just loving myself. So I remember this is like 6th grade, 7th grade, and then I met and encountered God after 7th grade. And that was such a pivotal moment in my life, because once I finally knew who God said I was, it transformed everything to where I wasn't finding my identity in approval of the other people in my school or, you know, other people's standards of beauty, even media's standard of beauty that they're portraying in music videos, because it was like, oh, I can actually point back to who Jesus says I am, who God says I am. My dad, he's Muslim. And so because of that, and not having an actual firm foundation and relationship with God, I had nothing to pull my standards from.
Yeah.
So I'm just living life aimlessly, basically just living life based on who other people say I am or who these kids say I am. That's my identity. And so I think it's very important and how you can see how the trajectory of someone's life can change whenever you do encounter Jesus, because literally me encountering Jesus literally changed everything. He really helped me transform the way I see myself. It wasn't overnight.
Right.
But
Right.
you know,
Still a
with time, with time, he really helped me see, like, no, I am beautiful, and you know, these are just lies that other people are saying. And so, to truly just love who he created me, to be, every part of my being, my skin, my hair, the way I talk, my culture. It is really beautiful seeing, whenever you do encounter the Lord, he does help bring a redemptive process to you processing. Being an immigrant or being different and stuff like that.
Yeah, and there's no timeline on it. And I honor your hope in that. Like, I know that, you know, maybe it doesn't feel like they have hope for this yet, but I honor your hope in that you're being a forerunner and that you're carrying it forward and you're believing. And I think that, like, God moves in response to our faith.
Absolutely.